Hey, how are we doing, everyone? Welcome to Nova Combat. So today we're going to be discussing the age-old question, how useful is anger in a fight? Now, I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard this anecdote or this saying, is anger is just as good as bravery in a fight. And in a lot of ways, that statement is true, but in a lot of ways, anger can actually be a hindrance to you if you are in a fight or if you are in a self-defense situation. One of the things that I like to try and teach all of my students is whenever they're sparring or practicing self-defense is to totally be in control of their movements, to be thinking about what they're doing before they actually go ahead and do it, and not necessarily just to work on instinct. And even though instinct does play a part in fighting, thinking about stuff is the difference between a good fighter and a bad fighter. Someone that just swings for the hill, haymakers everywhere, those are not good fighters. If anything, they are not just a danger to the person they're fighting, but they're also a danger to themselves. The person who thinks, the person who effectively thinks of fighting as a chess game, are the ones that actually are going to give themselves a better chance of success. Thinking is the difference between a lot of amateur level combat sports athletes and professional combat sports athletes. They will meditate, they will play chess, they will use a lot of their time training, thinking about strategies, thinking about how to win a fight against an opponent. They won't just rely on their skill. They won't just rely on their bravery, on their anger. There's a lot more to fighting than than what it looks like to a lot of people. But I suppose anger does also have its place in professional combat sports as well. Imagine you are in a position where it's now or never, it's total desperation, and you've got to do something drastic to try and win. Well, in that scenario, anger can be of use. But just know that if you ever get to that point and it fails, that is probably it for you. The anger will be the last little bit of energy that you will have left in reserve. That's what you'll be sacrificing. So anger, in a lot of ways, I try to discourage the students from being angry whenever they are doing anything. And if they're sparring, for example, and they get hit and they don't like it and they start getting angry, I immediately tell them to stop, take a breather, then they can come back once they've got their head together and they can carry on. Because, as I mentioned earlier, anger can be a danger not just to the person you are sparring with, but also yourself. I mean, you can just imagine the situation where you end up throwing a technique out of anger and it's thrown poorly, and you twist your knee or you twist your ankle. Well, all of a sudden then that takes you out of training entirely. And part of that is controlling, restraining those emotions, understanding that anger will a lot of the times make you do things that you wouldn't normally do. Frustration, stress, anxiety, these are all emotions that are tied to anger that can cause problems when it comes to a sparring or a fight scenario. Not to mention, of course, that when anger is used, technique goes right out of the window. So I kind of mentioned earlier that if you have to use anger as a last resort, that is it. That's all you have left. Well, that also applies at the start of a fight. It applies in the middle of a fight. Anytime you have to use anger, you will be absolutely exhausted afterwards. And there's no coming back from that. One of the things that a lot of people, I think, underestimate when it comes to fighting is their stamina. Stamina is one of those things that if you're not emotionally strong, if you're not able to control your breathing, if you're not able to control your work rate, then your stamina is going to absolutely tank. You're not going to have anything left after even just 30 seconds. You know, I mean, I see it in local tournaments all the time where because the fight itself only lasts a minute and a half, that's what is timed. Both the fighters, they'll go 100% rah, 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 straight into it. And by the end of it, they are both absolutely exhausted. And I mean, most of them are exhausted by 30 seconds. And it's quite hilarious how the difference between some local tournaments and actual fighting events where there are rounds involved, because the athletes themselves know that they have to try and conserve their energy for when it matters, you know? Like, for example, if you have your opponent on the ropes, or you have some kind of advantage in the middle of the fight, well, that's the time to use up a little bit of those reserves. But of course, you still want to try and hold some back as well. I mean, we've seen it before in professional fights as well, where a fighter thinks they have an opportunity to go ham, and all of a sudden, their opponent has survived the ordeal, and they are absolutely exhausted, and they got nothing left. Well, what happens then? So even if you find yourself at some kind of advantage in a tournament or in some kind of self-defense scenario or something like that, be reserved and fully in control of how much work rate you put out. It's really important, because this applies to anyone at any stage of life as well. It's all well and good someone like me saying, well, if you want to be a better fighter, then you have to increase your stamina. You have to do more training. You have to do more running. You have to do more this, more that, la, la, la. That's not always practical. But practical advice when it comes to something like a self-defense scenario, conserving your energy applies to anyone, no matter what your fitness level might be. Being able to conserve your energy, being able to breathe, being able to control the adrenaline, because adrenaline can be useful, but only, again, in short bursts, can mean the difference between you winning or losing. So anger makes you tired. Simple as that. As soon as you have to use some kind of anger, you'll feel so strong for 10, 15, 20 seconds maybe. And then after that, that's it. You're finished. You're done. Finito. What more can you give after you've used up those reserves? There's literally nothing more you can do. And again, it's one of those things you can refer back to professional combat sports, where the fighter that gets gassed out early or earlier is the one that ends up being on the back foot in the later rounds of the fight. So you've almost got to guarantee 100% that you can finish the fight before your gas tank runs out. Otherwise, you're not going to win. Simple as that. We see it time and time and again. Conor McGregor, as a prime example, his work rate isn't actually that great compared to a lot of other fighters within the MMA world. But of course, he has relied a lot throughout his career on finishing fights early. That might determine his work rate a little bit in the fight itself. I'm not sure. But traditionally speaking, if his opponent ends up making it past round 3, well, he's got very little left in the tank. And in a lot of those cases, he loses. Because that is what happens. As soon as you lose that energy, as soon as you lose any kind of stamina that you've got left, you can't protect yourself. Even just holding your hands up to try and protect your head can be incredibly difficult at times when you're really tired. Not to mention the fact that a lot of fighters have this habit. When they're tired, they turn their back to their opponent. And that is the worst thing you can do, is turn your back to your opponent. Even when you're tired, the worst thing you can do is turn your back. Because one, you can't see what's coming towards you. And two, the back is very, very vulnerable. You're vulnerable to chokes. You're vulnerable to takedowns. You're vulnerable to pretty much anything. Your ribs are totally exposed. It's, honestly, turning your back, to even turning your head, can be just a death sentence in some respects. But it can be a guaranteed loss if you are fighting in a combat sports scenario. But could end up resulting in death or serious injury, at worst, in a self-defense scenario. So if any of you are out there watching this video, you don't practice martial arts, take this away from this video. The one thing I want you to take away from this video: if you ever get involved in a situation like that, I hope you don't, but if you do, just remember to conserve as much energy as possible. Only use that strength, that stamina, as and when you need to use it. It does help, of course, if you are an athlete of some kind, if you do running or cycling, whatever the case might be, stamina, those kinds of exercises, running, cycling, are pretty much the best things you can do to increase your stamina. And if it's something that you are worried about, well, do some training. You don't have to do it in a martial arts gym, but of course, if you do, that's great, because you get to learn a little bit of technique as well, and a little bit of technique, a little bit of experience goes a long way. But the fundamental things are stamina, endurance. That's what you need. You need to be able to maintain a consistent work rate over a longer period of time. And it's quite interesting, actually, how when we're teaching self-defense, you want to end the situation quickly, because if you don't, the longer it goes on, the more chance there is of you getting hurt. So you really do want to end the self-defense situation maybe within 30 seconds, something ridiculous like that, honestly. Because, like I said, that leaves a lot of room for error. So I think it's a little bit different in a self-defense scenario. But at the same time as well, you don't want to use up all that energy within the first 10 seconds and leave nothing left in reserve for when you actually do see an opportunity. And I suppose it does also go in the opposite direction as well, where your opponent who is attacking you, well, they're going to be using up their reserves as well. And a lot of it is a case of finding that opportunity where you know they are tired and capitalizing on that advantage. But for the most part, just remember to keep an eye, be consciously aware of the amount of work that you are outputting when you are facing an opponent, whether if it's in sparring, whether if it's in a tournament, whether if it's in a self-defense situation or self-defense training or BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, whatever the case might be, try and conserve as much of that energy as possible, especially if it ends up becoming like a grappling situation. Honestly, grappling takes it out of you, man, honestly. I don't know what it is about grappling, but it's very physically intense all the time. You've got to be able to maintain pretty much a high level of intensity throughout the ground game. Whenever you're working on the ground, whenever you're grappling, whenever you're wrestling, whatever the case might be, you've got to be able to maintain that higher work rate to give yourself the opportunities to gain a full mount or being able to apply a guard or whatever the case might be. It's quite funny because recently we did a grappling session, and even though I had a full guard against one of my students, they were putting their entire body weight on me, and even just something as silly as that can really drain your stamina level. And it's in those situations where you've got to try and learn how to manage that stamina, how to manage that endurance, because even something like that can really drain your energy. But I mean, that's in grappling, that's in BJJ, and for me personally, if it's a self-defense scenario, you want to use striking. Striking, I know that might sound a little bit biased considering my background, but striking, you give yourself more chance to end the situation quicker through striking than through restraints, especially if there are weapons involved. I mean, if you try taking someone down wrestling style, then try and do some ground game BJJ with someone that's got a knife, for example, you're running a pretty high risk of getting stabbed in that situation. So striking in that scenario, kicking, punching, trying to use reach advantages wherever you can mean the difference between life and death in that situation as well. And whenever you're able to back away from someone in a self-defense scenario, it gives yourself a little bit of breathing room, gives yourself a bit of time to catch your breath, whereas in a wrestling situation, a grappling situation, you're not going to have that chance. It has to be 100% work rate 100% of the time. At least that's how it feels anyway. I'm sure that if you practice BJJ or wrestling, then you are going to be able to maintain that higher work rate for longer periods of time than people who haven't trained that much in wrestling or BJJ. But anyway, everyone, so when it comes down to it, anger can only be useful in very particular situations, and even then, it's a high-risk strategy. You end up using anger, that is your final roll of the dice. In a self-defense scenario, in a combat sports scenario, it doesn't really matter what it is. If you have to use anger, like I said, that's a gamble, and it's the biggest roll of the dice throughout the entire scenario, the entire situation. So always remember to stay in control of your emotions, stay in control of your adrenaline, stay in control of your breathing, stay in control of your work rate. Only use energy when you need to, when you know it's the right opportunity to use it. And that is the biggest difference a lot of the times between someone who trains in martial arts, trains in sparring, and someone who doesn't. Is they're going to be able to manage their stamina a hell of a lot better. They're going to be able to understand what their work rate is in a fight situation. Even someone who is a runner, like an amateur level runner or something like that, they're probably going to have an incredibly high stamina. But then they get involved in some kind of fight scenario. What if they end up using all that energy all in one go because they don't actually know how to regulate their work rate? That's something else to consider when it comes to fighting in general. But I hope that this has been an interesting video for you, and I hope that we've answered that question, whether or not anger is actually useful in a fight. And for the most part, it probably isn't. But there you have it, everyone. Leave a like. Let us know what you think down in the comment section below. As always, let us know what you think. Has anger helped you in a self-defense situation before, or in a sparring situation? Drop it down in the comments. Let me know. But that'll do for today's video. Thank you ever so much again for watching. Take care. Have a good one.